We often speak of the champion's invincibility, the mental fortress built over years of grueling competition. But what happens when the ultimate competitor is blindsided by a force entirely outside the ropes, a force that pays no mind to tradition or the sanctity of the Sunday back nine? For the dedicated followers of the gentleman's game, the image of Payne Stewart remains etched in the collective memory: the knickers and cap, the elegant, almost defiant style, and the steely gaze of a man who demanded perfection from himself and respect from the course. Stewart was defined by control, a relentless pursuit of precision that culminated in the euphoric summer of 1999. His victory at Pinehurst that year, immortalized by one of the most iconic winning putts in major history, seemed to herald a new, mature chapter for the fiercely talented, often tempestuous player. He had reached the summit, he had secured his legacy, and yet there is a profound and chilling irony of fate in this narrative. The man who mastered the unpredictable winds of the links, who thrived on the tightest margins of competitive golf, would ultimately be undone by the vast, uncontrolled expanse of the sky. The silence that followed that October morning was not the respectful hush of the 18th green waiting for a decisive putt. It was the crushing, absolute silence of loss. The sudden, incomprehensible tragedy of Stewart's passing ripped through the fabric of the professional circuit, forcing rivals to lower their shoulders and look inward. In that moment of shared grief, something extraordinary happened. The competitive edge softened, if only temporarily, and the sport recognized its own fragility. The loss of Payne Stewart, the competitor, the father, the flamboyant showman, irrevocably united the game in a way no major championship ever could. It was a stark reminder that even the greatest among us are merely passing through the fairway of time. This sudden void challenged us all to redefine what truly matters beyond the scorecard. It asked us, what is the true measure of a man's time in the arena? Did you witness that era? Do you remember where you were when the news broke and how it shifted your perspective on the game? Share your memories of Stewart's indelible impact and his lasting legacy in the comments below. The canvas of professional golf has always been painted in shades of green and the muted tones of respectability. But occasionally, a character arrives, demanding brighter hues, a bold splash of color against the traditional landscape. Payne Stewart was that splash. He arrived on the scene as an anomaly, a fiercely competitive, exquisitely tailored anachronism. In an era where players transitioned towards standardized polos and muted slacks, Stewart insisted on the full regalia of golf's past: the tam o'shanter cap, the knickers, the high socks. It wasn't merely fashion, it was a declaration. It suggested a profound reverence for the game's history, combined with an undeniable, sometimes theatrical flair for the moment. He possessed the swagger of a bygone era, often leading to him being categorized, perhaps unfairly, as the consummate showman rather than the ultimate competitor. Yet as the years marched on, the results began to drown out the critics. Stewart's swing was rhythmic, smooth, and utterly reliable, especially under duress. He was a man built for the Sunday back nine, possessing the ice in his veins necessary to conquer the US Open, the championship that demands the most precise brand of mental fortitude. The year 1999 stands as his competitive zenith, the US Open at Pinehurst No. 2. He was 42 years old, having battled through a mid-career slump where the victories seemed elusive. It was at Pinehurst that Stewart shed the final vestiges of the showman label, transforming undeniably into the champion. The duel against Phil Mickelson remains one of the most compelling final-round confrontations in modern major history. The pressure was suffocating. Stewart, needing a par on the 18th to secure the title, faced a treacherous 15-foot putt. It wasn't just for the trophy, it was for redemption, for validation, for his legacy. The ball found the center of the cup. The resulting celebration, the classic fist pump, the pure, unadulterated release of emotion, became the defining photograph of his career. But the true measure of the man, perhaps, was revealed in the moments immediately following the victory. Mickelson, whose wife was expecting their first child, received a profound gesture from Stewart. Stewart cupped Mickelson's face in his hands and famously told him, "You're going to be a father now, be ready." It was an act of profound competitive grace, demonstrating that the fiercely theatrical competitor was, at heart, a gentleman who understood the priorities beyond the scorecard. Just 4 months later, the roar of the crowd was replaced by an unnerving absolute silence. The suddenness of the loss on that October morning was a shockwave that stopped the world of golf cold. The game, so focused on individual achievement, suddenly found itself grappling with a collective, profound grief. The irony was devastating. A man whose life was defined by control over the trajectory of a golf ball, control over his public image, was taken by events entirely outside of human command. The reaction from the professional ranks was immediate and deeply moving. The Tour Championship was approaching, and while the competition continued, it was shrouded in reverence. Players wore the knickers and caps as a silent, visible tribute to their fallen colleague. The competitive barriers dissolved, replaced by a shared sense of loss and the stark reminder of the fragile nature of life. The loss of Payne Stewart forced the golf world to pause and reflect on what truly constitutes a legacy. It wasn't just the 3 major championships or the stunning fashion. It was the competitive spirit, balanced by the unexpected kindness he displayed in his final major moment. And there is one more detail that you cannot imagine, a subtle testament to the unity his passing inspired. At the 2000 US Open, just months after the tragedy, the United States Golf Association retired the locker that Stewart had used the previous year at Pinehurst. It was a gesture of permanent remembrance. But more profoundly, they decided to commemorate his victory, not with a plaque on the clubhouse wall, but with a life-sized bronze statue positioned precisely where he drained that final history-making putt on the 18th green. The statue depicts him in his signature attire, his arms raised in triumph. It does not commemorate his passing. It freezes his peak moment of life and competitive joy. It serves as a constant, silent reminder to every competitor who walks that fairway that the true victory lies not just in the score, but in the spirit with which the game is played. Payne Stewart's legacy is not defined by the tragedy of his end, but by the vibrancy of his life and the unexpected way his absence brought a fiercely competitive community together, reminding us all that golf is, fundamentally, a gentleman's game, played by men who are tragically mortal. For stories that define the character of champions and the history of the links, please consider joining us again. We look forward to seeing you at the next tee. The game of golf, at its purest, is defined by control. Control over the swing, control over the mind, control over the outcome. Yet the story we recount today is a stark reminder that even the most meticulously controlled trajectory can be shattered by the capricious hand of destiny. We look back now, not at the haunting trajectory of an aircraft, but at the ascendance of a man who embodied competitive theatre, Payne Stewart. He was, quite simply, the last great romantic of the modern game. In an era of muted polos and visor uniformity, Stewart strode onto the hallowed grounds of the PGA Tour, dressed in the full regalia of golf's bygone age: knickers, cap, high socks. This was not mere eccentricity, it was a defiant statement of personality. He was a gladiator in tweed, his attire serving as a psychological edge, demanding attention before he ever pulled a club from the bag. His career was characterized by an intense, often polarizing ferocity. In the early years, Stewart was known for his sharp tongue and his impatience, traits that spoke to a deep-seated desire for perfection. He was a competitor in the purest sense, viewing the golf course as a battlefield where second place was merely the first loser. That competitiveness reached its zenith in June of 1999 at Pinehurst during the US Open. The final putt he sank on the 18th green, defeating Phil Mickelson in a dramatic, heart-stopping finish, was more than just a victory. It was a career validation, a portrait of grace under unimaginable pressure. He cradled Mickelson's face, offering words of encouragement about the pending birth of Phil's child, a gesture of maturity and respect that cemented his transition from a fiery talent to a respected statesman of the game. It is the cruelest irony of the sporting world that Stewart was taken at the absolute peak of his competitive and personal reconciliation. Just 4 months after that triumphant moment at Pinehurst, the news arrived, not of a missed cut or a playoff loss, but of a catastrophic sudden void. The tour, which often operates as a collection of solitary contractors chasing individual glory, was instantly unified by grief. It was a shared trauma that transcended rivalries. The loss of a competitor so vital, so visible, so alive, served as a powerful, chilling reminder of the fragility that underlies even the greatest achievements. If golf is often compared to life, a series of calculated risks, good breaks and bad lies, then the loss of Payne Stewart forced every player to pause and reassess the scorecard. The competitive grind, the endless pursuit of the lowest number, suddenly yielded to a shared humanity. The Tour Championship of 1999 held just days after the tragedy, became less of a tournament and more of a solemn pilgrimage. Players arrived in Houston wearing replica knickers and caps, a sartorial tribute that spoke volumes. The atmosphere was thick with reverence, the usual tension replaced by a quiet, collective mourning. The winner that week, Tiger Woods, generously donated his entire prize money to the Payne Stewart Family Foundation, setting a tone of profound respect and solidarity. And there is one poignant detail that perhaps only the most dedicated golf aficionados truly appreciate, a gesture that perfectly encapsulates the enduring nature of his legacy, the missing club. In the wake of his passing, the PGA Tour chose to honor Stewart's memory, not just with words but with a physical, tangible tribute on the course itself. At the Bay Hill Club, during the Arnold Palmer Invitational, the tour officially retired the pin position for Sunday's final round on the 18th hole. It is known simply as the Payne Stewart pin location. But there is more. At the Ryder Cup, a competition Stewart passionately embraced, the tradition of honoring him became woven into the fabric of the event. Stewart had famously served as a mentor and emotional anchor for the American team. His presence, his unwavering nationalism, was critical. The ultimate physical memorial, however, stands at the practice facility at the Bay Hill Club in Orlando. It is a stunning bronze statue depicting Stewart in his triumphant pose from Pinehurst, arms raised in glorious celebration. It is a perfect encapsulation of victory, style, and competitive fire. But there is one final detail you might not imagine. The statue's bag contains only 13 clubs. The 14th, the driver he used to shape his game and his identity, is symbolically missing. It is a powerful metaphor. The champion, who was taken mid-swing, the journey incomplete yet the victory eternal. The Payne Stewart's passing did not just silence a fierce competitor. It amplified the quiet dignity of the game he loved. It taught the tour that while scores separate rivals, shared loss unites a community. His legacy is not just the 3 major championships he secured, but the enduring memory of the man who, in his sudden absence, reminded the golfing world that the gentleman's game is ultimately about the men themselves. For more stories that shape this beautiful, heartbreaking sport, we invite you to reflect on these moments of history. Nos vemos no próximo tee. The game of golf, by its very nature, demands a quiet, almost monastic adherence to decorum. Yet for a brief, brilliant period at the close of the 20th century, the landscape was dominated by a figure who challenged that austerity with sheer theatrical flair. We speak, of course, of William Payne Stewart. He was the anomaly, the competitor who dared to dress in the fashion of a bygone era, the knickers, the tailored shirts, the signature tam o' shanter cap. It was an aesthetic commitment that spoke volumes. Stewart was not merely playing a sport, he was inhabiting a tradition. He brought an old-world elegance to the modern high-stakes arena, daring his contemporaries to meet his gaze across the fairway. Payne Stewart was perhaps the most polarizing champion of his generation. He possessed a gaze that could bore holes through granite, and a competitive intensity that bordered on the ferocious. He was not always the most beloved figure on the tour, often perceived as aloof, perhaps even arrogant when the spotlight was brightest. But this intensity, this unyielding demand for perfection, was the engine of his greatness. His career trajectory was a study in delayed gratification. He secured his second major championship in 1991, but the subsequent years were marked by frustrating near misses. He suffered agonizing defeats, most famously at the 1998 US Open, where he faltered, yielding the title to the young firebrand Lee Janzen. It was a loss that could have broken a lesser man. But champions, true champions, understand that the deepest wells of character are often tapped in the moments of greatest despair. And so we arrive at Pinehurst, the village of the Pines, in June of 1999. This was Stewart's masterpiece. At 42, he was navigating the unforgiving crucible of the US Open, battling both the course's demanding geometry and the relentless challenge of Phil Mickelson, a man who represented the future of the sport. The final hour of that Sunday was a clinic in nerve. The two men stood tied as they approached the treacherous 17th hole. Stewart, pulling out his long iron, struck a precise shot, landing within 15 feet of the hole. Mickelson, unable to match the position, settled for a par. Stewart then faced a downhill twisting putt for birdie. The silence that descended upon Pinehurst No. 2 was absolute, a heavy blanket of anticipation. When the ball dropped, Stewart reacted not with a scream, but with a contained, profound release of tension, a moment of vindication earned through years of struggle. His lead secured, He walked to the 18th tee, the sun beginning its slow descent over the Carolina sandhills. The final scene, however, remains etched in the collective memory of the game, the 20-foot par putt on the final green to seal the victory. As the ball disappeared, Stewart raised his right leg high, thrusting his fist into the air. It was a pose of defiance, of triumph, and of perfect theatrical symmetry. It was the moment Payne Stewart transitioned from a competitor, defined by flair, to a legend defined by fortitude. The victory had been transformative. Stewart had found a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper faith, and a profound appreciation for the brotherhood of the tour. The fiercely competitive exterior softened slightly, replaced by a grateful maturity. Then came October 25, 1999. The news arrived like a thunderclap across the usually placid landscape of professional golf. The mechanism of the tragedy, a catastrophic loss of cabin pressure, was stark, clinical, and unforgiving. It instantly rendered all scorecards, all rivalries, and all prize money utterly meaningless. The irony of fate was devastating. A man who had finally found peace and perspective after years of striving was removed from the arena in a moment of terrifying, unexpected finality. The reaction was immediate, and it was unifying. The golf world, often fragmented by the fierce individualism required for success, suddenly became a single, grieving family. The loss of Stewart was not just the loss of a champion, it was the loss of a vibrant, unmistakable personality, a touchstone of style and competitive fire. In the ensuing weeks, the tributes were heartfelt, genuine, and deeply emotional. His peers, who had battled him stroke for stroke, spoke not of his majors, but of his humanity, his wit, and the sheer audacity of his presence. The true measure of his legacy was displayed less than a month later at the Tour Championship. The PGA Tour made a decision unprecedented in its history. Stewart's parking spot at the champion's locker room was left vacant. His locker, adorned with the trophies he would never win, was draped with his iconic colors. The silence of that space was louder than any applause. This collective pause, this act of reverence, forced the game to confront its own soul. It reminded every player, every caddy, and every official that the tour was not merely a collection of independent contractors, but a fraternity bound by shared sacrifice and mutual respect. The US Open at Pinehurst, which Stewart had so heroically claimed, became the permanent monument to his final triumph. A life-sized bronze statue now stands near the 18th green, forever frozen in that pose of victory, the high leg, the fist raised against the sky. It is a constant, silent reminder of the champion who found his greatest glory just before his final curtain call. And there is one more detail you might not imagine, a subtle testament to the enduring bond Stewart shared with his peers. Before his passing, he had penned a series of letters to his friends and colleagues, sharing reflections on life, faith, and the future. These letters, discovered after the tragedy, became profound, unexpected gifts, a final, intimate communication from a man who, in his last months, had truly learned how to connect. Payne Stewart's legacy is not simply 3 major titles, or the theatrical breeches he wore so proudly. It is the demonstration that even the fiercest competitor, the most uncompromising professional, can leave behind a spirit that binds the community together in shared memory. He reminded us all that the gentleman's game is above all about the gentlemen themselves. For more stories that capture the passion and tradition of the game, we invite you to continue this journey with us. We shall see you at the next tee. The stage was always set for Payne Stewart. He didn't merely walk onto a golf course. He arrived, draped in the tailored elegance of the early 20th century, a living, breathing anachronism in his signature +4s. This sartorial choice was not affectation. It was a statement. It declared that this man understood the history of the game, even as he stood ready to rewrite its immediate future. To watch Stewart was to witness the raw theater of competition. He possessed the fierce, almost territorial intensity of a prize fighter, yet delivered his blows with the precision of a classical musician. He was a polarizer early in his career, a showman whose temperament sometimes flared under the intense pressure of a Sunday back nine. He was, in short, the purest definition of a formidable opponent. His greatest triumphs were defined by this competitive fire. Consider Pinehurst in 1999, the US Open, the culmination of a career built on near misses and psychological fortitude. That final iconic putt on the 18th, securing the victory against the charging Phil Mickelson, a moment of pure, unadulterated competitive triumph, followed immediately by a gesture of profound respect toward Mickelson, who was awaiting the birth of his first child. In that instant, Stewart transcended the role of the showman and became the elder statesman. It is the cruelest irony of fate that a man whose professional life was defined by control over the trajectory of a long iron, control over the trembling hands necessary for a critical 12-foot par save, would lose control in a manner entirely beyond the boundaries of the course or indeed human intervention. On October 25, 1999, the golf world stopped. The news arrived not as a dramatic crash, but as a chilling, slow realization of absence. The journey of the unresponsive Learjet across the heartland was a modern metaphor for helplessness. While Payne Stewart, shielded by the altitude and the silence of the cabin, may have passed peacefully, the shockwave that hit the PGA Tour was immediate and profound. The golf fraternity is often portrayed as a collection of fiercely independent businessmen vying for millions, but Stewart's passing forced a moment of collective introspection, pulling the curtain back on the deeper bonds that hold the sport together. In the days that followed, the PGA Tour did something unprecedented. It cancelled the season-ending Tour Championship. The silence on the greens was deafening, a respectful hush that eclipsed the usual competitive din. Players who had fought tooth and nail against Stewart suddenly wore his colours, his memory serving as an unexpected unifying force. The legacy of Payne Stewart, therefore, is not simply measured by his 3 major championships. It is measured by the profound change in perspective he inadvertently gifted the game. His death forced players to look beyond the scorecard and recognize the fleeting nature of the journey they shared. This realization was formalized a year later with the establishment of the Payne Stewart Award, dedicated to recognizing a golfer who exemplifies character, charity, and commitment to the game's traditions. It is a tribute fitting for the man he had become, a mentor, a man of faith, and a devoted family man, qualities often obscured by the aggressive glare of the competitive spotlight. The memory of the man in the knickers remains indelible. He was the bridge between the game's genteel past and its powerful modern future. He taught us that while the quest for victory is paramount, the manner in which one conducts oneself, both in triumph and defeat, is the true measure of a champion. Payne Stewart's final unsung flight did not diminish his legend. It solidified it, reminding us all that the most cherished victory is the legacy we leave behind in the hearts of those we compete alongside. For more stories that capture the spirit and tradition of this gentleman's game, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts below on the greatest moments of competitive elegance in golf history. We'll see you next time back on the first tee.